suggestion would be, if you draw anything on your paper, when you're not given a unit circle, it should be the first quadrant and maybe some of the quadrantal angles. So when I'm talking about the first quadrant, I'm talking about the ordered pairs for the first quadrant. So that's where your left-hand trick comes, right? So what's the ordered pair for 30 degrees, the first line? Yeah, radical 3 over 2, 1/2. What's the next ordered pair? You can write this on your paper. Radical 2 over 2, radical 2 over 2, and the last one? Yep, you got it. So if you know those, and you know that the first line here is for 30 degrees or for pi over 6. The second one's 45 degrees, pi over 4. And 60 degrees, pi over 3. That's really all you need to know other than the possible signs. Right? We know that signs are positive, both positive in the first quadrant, negative, positive in the second quadrant, negative, negative, positive, negative. You need those things. And then maybe the quadrantal ordered pairs. So your corners here. 1, 0, 0, 1, negative 1, 0, and 0, negative 1. And honestly, by the time you do this a few times, you might not even need to write that down. I use my left-hand trick for all of them, but you don't need a lot more than that. So you'll have this at the top of your paper. Let's go through just like 3 quick ones here to kind of show you. What you do need to know, though, is what quadrant an angle is in. Not, like, you don't need to memorize the ordered pair that goes with this. You need to know what quadrant 4 pi over 3 falls in. So think about your tricks with pi's. If the numerator is 1 more than the denominator, what quadrant is that? 3. All right, so 4 pi over 3 is in quadrant 3. If pi is the numerator, what quadrant are you in? 1. Okay, 11 pi over 6. That'd be in 4. Good. Now think about degrees. 210. 10 3 is bigger than 180, but not quite 270. And negative 240. See, where's positive 240? Positive, yeah, this is in quadrant 2. So if you were in positive 240, you'd be in quadrant 3. You have to reflect it up into quadrant 2. So if you know what quadrant you end in, this actually is not going to be that hard to find the trig values. So let's talk about the bottom here. All right? I'm going to sketch what you guys have. Now, and 1/2 radical 3 over 2. All right, that's all I need. So sine of 5 pi over 3. What quadrant is 5 pi over 3 in? 4. Okay, so things you need to know in order to answer this question. You need to know that sine of 5 pi over 3 is in quadrant 4. In quadrant 4, right, we know our ordered pairs are either positive or negative. Sine is the y coordinate, right? So is y positive or negative in quadrant 4? Negative. So my answer is going to be negative. The reference angle. Well, if this is 5 pi over 3, I'm going to pull up our unit circle from before over here. 5 pi over 3 is down here. If you were to make a triangle with a reference angle right there, what would the reference angle be? Pi over 6, pi over 4, or pi over 3? Pi over 3. This is reflecting of pi over 3 right here. One way you can find that out is look at the denominator. The denominator is 3, so the reference angle is pi over 3. Okay. 5 pi over 3 is a multiple of 60 degrees, or pi over 3. Okay, well, what's the ordered pair for pi over 3? Look at your first quadrant here. Which one? 1/2 radical 3 over 2. Right, we said that was pi over 3. Well, which is the y value? The second one, right? So it just has to be negative. Negative radical 3 over 2 is the answer. And if you want to check, you go to your unit circle and say, oh, that's right, negative radical 3 over 2. So once you get the hang of this more, you don't even have to write this down. You can just use your hand if you know what quadrant you're going to be in. So let's try the next one. Cosine of 3 pi over 4. What quadrant is 3 pi over 4 in? 2. Nope. Oh, yeah, it is. Sorry. We're in quadrant 2. Now, cosine is the x value. In the quadrant 2, is cosine positive or negative? X is negative in quadrant 2. So I'll have a negative answer. What's the reference angle for 3 pi over 4? Pi over 4. You use the denominator. Pi over 4. It's multiple to 45. So pi over 4 is the middle one. Radical 2 over 2, radical 2 over 2. Squeeze it in here. So you take the x value and make it negative. And that's your answer. Let's look at sine. 7 pi over 6. What quadrant? 3. Okay. In quadrant 3, sine is the y coordinate. Is the y coordinate positive or negative? Negative. These all just happen to be negative. I'll do a positive one. What is the reference angle here? Pi over 6. You do the denominator. So pi over 6 is this first ordered pair. Radical 3 over 2, 1/2. That's your reference angle. Well, if it has to be negative, what's the answer? Negative 1/2. So all of the practice today will have all these steps written out so you can think about it. Really quickly though, your reference angles, if you have anything with a denominator of 6, so this is on the next page. This is just, this whole sheet, you don't have to write anything down, this is just for your knowledge. If you have a denominator of 6, that means it's a multiple of 30 degrees. So your reference angle for this first line here, if you have 5 pi over 6, 7 pi over 6, 11 pi over 6, they all refer back to pi over 6 in quadrant 1. That's what we were using as the reference angle. Any of the multiples with the pi over 4 as the and 4 as the denominator, 3 pi over 4, 5 pi over 4, 7 pi over 4, refer back to pi over 4 in quadrant 1. So you have the same x or y value, just different positive or negative signs. And the same thing here. Any multiple of pi over 3 refers back to it in the first quadrant. You only need those 3 ordered pairs. So when you're going through, and then I have this unit circle, you've seen this before, I just wanted it there. It talks about what the numerator is, the radians, there's the unit circle for you to check. But when you get to a problem like, this is different, this is just asking you for the quadrant that you finish in. But suppose I say, what is sine of 2 pi over 3? So like your test or your quiz next week will not have all those, what quadrant is it in or anything like that. So what I was doing once I got the hang of this, because remember I had to teach this to myself a couple weeks ago, is I thought to myself, okay, what quadrant is sine of 2 pi over 3 in? Well, 2 pi over 3 is in quadrant 2, and I need the y coordinate. So I got my left hand out, and I looked at my trick. Okay, pi over 3, that's the top one. So I went down, and I said, oh, I need the y, so that's the bottom, radical 3 over 2. Because y is positive in that quadrant. Yeah. And then if I gave you cosine of, let's see, 11 pi over 6, what quadrant is 11 pi over 6 in? 4. Okay, so we're in quadrant 4. Cosine is x, so in fourth quadrant, x is positive. So I need positive cosine over 6, that's the bottom. Ring finger. Cosine is x, that's the top, so that would be positive radical 3 over 2. Okay. See how, like, once you know, like, just those 3, if you know your ordered pairs are positive, positive, oops, flip that. Then it goes, it's really not that bad. Yes, maybe. The more you practice it, it does get a little bit easier. But knowing this stuff, what quadrant you're in, will help you. Okay? So we're going to practice. You can practice today with the